You are listening to the Air Raid Hour with host Judge Mathis, dog, Tilt Money, dog, presented by the fine folks over at the Cover One Sports Network, dogs. Bills Mafia, let's go!
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. Together, we are the Bills guys, and this show is presented by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. And I'll tell you what, I hope you all enjoyed your Christmas weekend. It was a victory Christmas weekend as the Bills beat the Bears 35-13 yesterday to improve to 12-3 on the season. And they are AFC East champs for the third consecutive season. This victory sets up an absolutely monumental matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals next week on Monday Night Football. I can't remember a bigger game this late in the season, league-wide, not just Bills specific, but really like league-wide. But first, we need to put a bow on this one. What are your initial thoughts on this? Like, I called a sloppy beatdown, a sloppy 35-13 beatdown over the Chicago Bears.
I mean, I will say, I think Greg Tomset kind of summed it up best in his tweet. Like, he articulated exactly how I think a lot of us were feeling, which was like, your team played pretty crappy. You got frustrated, you got annoyed, and at the end of the day, you still beat this team on the road by 22 points. And so it's like, for me, and I tweeted something similar yesterday, right? Like, I'm like, look, was it a perfect game? No, but like, this is not, in my mind, this is not a win is a win game. A win is a win game is a sloppy, close win against a team that you maybe shouldn't have struggled with. You still beat this team by 22 points. So like, you played a relatively bad game by your standards, and you still won by 22 points. And Roy says Chicago is as bad as everyone who thought they were, but they did come in, with a very good rushing attack. We mentioned in the pregame them getting Khalil Herbert back, and the Bills just shut it down. So there are a lot of positives as well to take away from this game. But my initial thoughts were, I was never really that stressed, honestly. Whereas, like, if you go back to Thanksgiving against the Lions, a team who was like very much under 500 at the time we played them, like, I was stressed during that game. This game, I wasn't really stressed out.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, this game I think shows the Bills' number one weakness, and that is themselves. I mean, they won this game 35-13, running away, as you mentioned, despite bad first half, leaving points on the board, and 3 turnovers. A lot of teams do what the Buffalo Bills did in this game, especially the special teams in the first half, which was not great either. The field position game was not great. A lot of teams play like the Buffalo Bills did on offense, turning the ball over on special teams, first half offense, that is, and they lose that game. So it just sort of shows how good the Buffalo Bills are. Their biggest enemy really is themselves. And if they clean it up and they play a clean football game, they can beat anyone in the National Football League. And obviously that's pretty evident from the fact that they sit right now 12-3, one of the best 5 teams in football.
Yep. They are one of the best 5 teams in football, and they've retained that 1 seed, which is obviously so huge at this point in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like almost too, like, this game can be summed up. Like, I feel like this game can be summed up in like a paragraph, and then we should like move on to Cincinnati. But obviously we're going to talk through some things, but there were some negatives in this game that we're going to get to. Diggs' lack of targets, Allen's 2 interceptions, 6 first half points, the first half special teams with leaving points on the board with Tyler Bass and bad field position. But there are some positives, which we're going to talk about as well. The running game went absolutely nuclear, especially in the second half. James Cook was 1 yard away from the Buffalo Bills having 2 100-yard rushers. And I think the last time the Bills did that was like CJ Spiller and Fred Jackson, or maybe Gillislee and McCoy did it at one point. But it's been a while since the Buffalo Bills have done that. And the defense was nearly perfect after the first drive, containing Justin Fields and the Bears running game. So we're going to get to all that. But before we do, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it's just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right. It's a victory Monday. So we're going to start with the post-game positives this evening.
Terry just texted me to smile.
So if Terry was texting Brandon Bean after this game, other than a smile, there were a lot of good things to text. Dawson Knox, who got the wind knocked out of him on the first play, continued to look good. He had 3 big receptions in this game. I would say I think the weather played a little bit more of a factor in the passing game than we think, just because of how good Josh Allen is in throwing in these conditions. He didn't have the best game. We're going to dig into that in a little bit, but the positives, and I think this is our stat of the game, is the Bills running game. Devin Singletary, 12 carries for 106 yards and a touchdown. It's an 8.8 yards per carry average. He had 2 catches for 19 yards on a huge drive to open the second half. Both those catches came on that drive. James Cook had 11 carries for 99 yards. That lack of 1 yard to get to 100 stings.
It does bother me a little. It does bother me a little.
For a 9-yard average, he had 1 catch for 9 yards. Josh Allen carried the ball 6 times for 41 yards and a touchdown. That's a 6.8 yards per carry average. The offensive line from left to right was Deion Dawkins, Roger Saffold, Ryan Bates, Greg Van Roten, and Spencer Brown. There was a 9-play situation in the game where Ryan Bates left with an injury. Van Roten slid to center, and Ike Bodker took some snaps at right guard. So Ike Bodker was out there for a little bit. What were your thoughts on this Buffalo Bills running game today?
I mean, it made a couple comments online about this as well, and we had talked about it in the pregame, right? I was like, I expect Devin Singletary to have a good game. Bills have been running the ball pretty well. James Cook was a wild card pick for me. And both guys really ate it up today, or I should say on Saturday. And so for me, the thing that's the nicest about it, right, is it feels like when the Bills really want to go to this running game, they have it in their arsenal. Now, I know Chicago is not a good run defense, and I know they're one of the worst defenses DVOA wise anyway in the league, but they knew that the Bills were going to have this potentially in their arsenal. And to me, the fact that you could get both guys going, the Bills have had such good success in putting teams away and really pulling away from teams, I should say, when both of these guys get going. And to me, we had some questions, right, without Mitch Morse, and we had some questions about how this offensive line was going to perform even against a pretty subpar unit in the Bears, and they really handled themselves well in this running game. And to give the Bears a taste of their own medicine, in a sense, right, do something to the Bears that the Bears have been doing to other teams, albeit not really winning, obviously, but to go in there into Soldier Field and kind of exert your will on the ground, to me, this is a good sign for the Bills to head into these last 2 regular season games and then into the postseason.
Yeah, David Reed comes in and says, we're going to need that same running game on Monday night to keep Burrow and that offense off of the field. There was a really nice stat from our guy Hans on Twitter yesterday. He said NFL running backs with 950 plus scrimmage yards and 25 plus receptions the last 4 years, there's only been 4 of them. Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, and Buffalo Bills running back Devin Singletary. The Bills run game always seems to sort of trend in the right direction this type of year, oftentimes spearheaded by Devin Singletary. This year, he's got James Cook accompanying him. We're going to talk about James Cook in a moment, but it's almost like as the weather turns, as does the Buffalo Bills focus on offense. I keep thinking back to an interview earlier this year with Trent Williams of the San Francisco 49ers, and they said, why are you guys so good at running the football and that Kyle Shanahan scheme? And Trent Williams' answer was really, I don't know, it stuck with me. And what Trent Williams said was, we're so good at running the ball because that is the focus of our practice. We spend a majority of our practice working on our running game concepts. That's why our running game is as good as it is, and why maybe our passing game is lacking compared to other teams in the league. Whereas the Buffalo Bills are one of the better passing teams in the league because they probably spend a majority of their practice most of the year focusing on the passing game. But as the weather starts to turn, they probably start to shift some of that focus in practice towards the running game, and you start to see the running game improve. And it's not even like the running game was all that awful earlier in the season. I know Allen inflates it a little bit, but the Buffalo Bills are still the only team who has gone every game this year with getting at least 100 rushing yards from scrimmage. But what are you expecting from this running game from here on out?
And can I just say something about Allen inflating it? Like, if he's part of your running game, that is part of your running game, right? Like, no one is taking away Lamar Jackson from the Ravens rushing attack when the Ravens lead the league in rushing for 2 or 3 years. No one's taking Justin Fields having 1,000 rushing yards plus this season, leading all quarterbacks in rushing yards, away from the Bears being one of the best rushing teams in the NFL. So, like, we can say, like, people can say, well, take Allen out of it in your running game. Well, no, like, he's part of it, right? He's part of it. And I think the thing that sometimes we get frustrated about is when we look at the game and how the games and how they unfold in that traditional running game, we're not getting that 100-yard guy every week. Like, that's just not who we are. So it's like when we see Devin Singletary have like an 8-carry game for 50 yards, like, it's not going to blow you off the map, right? But this type of game, showing that the Bills do have it somewhere in their arsenal, is really important to me. And I think that for me, like, Devin Singletary, James Cook, this duo, this time of year, it's important for the Bills to show it, right? It's important for them to show that they can do it, because teams need to respect it as they head into the postseason. And that's something that the Bills have been better at lately. And also, by the way, have been pretty efficient in more recent weeks on these short yardage situations that they weren't those are the things, the situations that kind of made us, scratch our heads early in the season. They've been a lot better at that too. So those two things, to me, really good sign heading forward here.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Allen is a weatherproof quarterback. He can throw the football in any condition. But we saw some games earlier this year where there were drops from receivers because of conditions. We saw today, and we're going to get to this when we start talking about the negatives, no other quarterback in the league outside of maybe Patrick Mahomes is throwing the ball as much as the Bills threw the ball yesterday. And that ended up being a detriment because it probably took the Bills away from running the ball more than they should have. But you need sort of that balanced attack in these weather conditions to sort of bring guys up in the box so Allen can work the ball down the field. But you're not going to be able to drop back and do it on every single play in these type of weather conditions. And that's why you really need that running back sort of position here in that running game to step up. And I think it's going to over the course of the next couple of weeks. And hopefully that carries through against a better opponent in the Cincinnati Bengals. Got a couple of comments here from some people in the comment section. We got Roy Collins saying, would you want a bigger, stronger running back to complement Cook next season, or try to re-sign Singletary? And then Dan Van K coming in saying, they have Hines too. I'd be stoked if they ran it back, but if Singletary wants to get paid, he really should. I sort of ran off that stat that Hans shared on Twitter about Devin Singletary being one of 4 running backs in the league with 950 plus yards from scrimmage and 25 plus catches over the last 4 years, in a league with Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, and Alvin Kamara. It's a loaded running back draft spearheaded by Bijan Robinson this year. It's a loaded free agent class spearheaded by Tony Pollard and Josh Jacobs this year. The Bills could likely afford to run this group back unless there is a team that has been watching Devin Singletary from afar this year and have really fallen in love with his game and want to throw him a big fat contract. The Buffalo Bills might be able to get Devin Singletary back for a reasonable rate next season, restructure Nyheim Hines, and have James Cook on that rookie deal and just run this backfield back. How would you feel if the Buffalo Bills ran this backfield back in 2023?
How I would feel? I'd feel fine. At the end of the day, the Bills have really, from a dollars investment standpoint, really not put much into this room right now. They have invested 2 third-round draft picks and traded for one, but dollars wise, they really haven't invested. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I have to think they're near the bottom or bottom half of the league in dollar allocation to that position. So it depends on kind of, I think, what happens with Hines and that restructuring. I think he's what, $3.5 million next year and maybe the year after. That's a lot of money to pay for just a guy who's really not contributing much other than, I mean, I guess they did pay Andre Roberts $2.5 million to be their kick returner. So maybe they will. But it wouldn't, I guess what it comes down to me to get down to for me is what is that dollar amount going to be for Devin Singletary? And in my mind, I kind of think 5 million maybe a year is probably the max in my mind, at least knee jerk reaction right now, like end of 2022.
And I don't even know if I'd pay that because
that's the max. Like that's the max. Like I maybe would give him a 3 or 15. Like I could wrap my head around it in that, but that would probably be the most I would want to do.
And that's a more than reasonable contract for a running back that produces like Devin Singletary does. He's a $4 to $6 million AAV running back, and that's a perfectly reasonable contract. And the Buffalo Bills give that to him. That's a perfectly reasonable contract to give. But RJ Melville comes in and says, I would do a committee next year of Cook, Hines, and whatever the biggest freak of a running back in the draft, like an AJ Dillon. I wouldn't even say the biggest freak of a running back in the draft because the biggest freak is Bijan Robinson. He's going to be a first rounder, maybe even a top 10 pick. But there are probably multiple guys that you can get rounds 4 to 7, a big bruising between the tackles type of back that you can get to complement Cook and Hines in this year's draft. And that sort of leads me to James Cook, who obviously popped off in this game. He's got 80 carries for 462 yards in the season and 2 touchdowns. That's 5.8 yards per carry, the highest of any running back in the NFL with 75 plus carries. He is rounding into form at the right time. He is becoming a legitimate weapon for this football team on a week in, week out basis. Seems like he's going to be a huge factor for the Buffalo Bills the rest of the way this season and into the future. And that plays a factor in this as well. Do you want to keep splitting carries with James Cook? Or eventually, do you just want to give this guy the ball 25 times a game?
I don't know.
Sort of what Roy Collins says here too. Would you want to pay Singletary to be second fiddle? Sorry.
Well, but I guess it comes down to like, I'm comfortable with James Cook being RB1, knowing that the Bills don't really ever give a running back 25 carries a game in this offense. Like it's just not who they are, right? It would be James Cook as like your new Singletary getting your 10 to 12 guaranteed, I'll call it, carries a game, and then some other complimentary back. And then there would be the games where maybe he gets the 16 to 18 carry range. But like James Cook was never the 20 plus carry guy in college. I'm not saying he can't be in the pros, but he is efficient with his touches. And sometimes there is a point of diminishing returns. So like at the risk of like, losing efficiency, like I'm fine if James Cook is 25 touches is still a lot of touches in the game, Brendan. Just saying, like 25 touches in a game for a running back is a lot. So I just don't know that the Bills offense is really catered to giving one running back that type of volume.
And I'm going to go back tonight, probably after the show, and I'm going to look to see how many touches Alvin Kamara has averaged a game over the last like 3 or 4 years, because I think that would be an interesting thing to look at, because I'm not saying James Cook is Alvin Kamara, but we can utilize him like the New Orleans Saints utilize Alvin Kamara. And I think he can be that type of weapon for us. And again, I'm not comparing him. Alvin Kamara is the better player, the better talent, but in this Bills offense, they can utilize him in a lot of the ways that they utilize Alvin Kamara. So it'll be interesting to see how many touches a game he gets, because I don't think Alvin Kamara dominates touches. Like maybe he did early on in his career, but I feel like lately he hasn't dominated touches. It's certainly not the way guys like Saquon Barkley have. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look that up. And Bills Fever comes in, and I agree with him a lot. James Cook is a weapon. We're just tapping into that potential. A couple of people are talking in the comment section. The Bills have let a lot of talent walk. I know we ended up keeping Zach Moss, which ended up getting us Nyheim Hines, by the way. But Raheem Blackshear is looking pretty good in Carolina in his minimal playing time, and he's being used on special teams. And Isaiah Hodgins looking like a real good player for the New York Giants with him getting run now. So that just shows like how much talent has come through the Buffalo Bills the last couple of years that these guys are walking, and the Buffalo Bills still ticking despite letting some of these guys go. All right, let's shift our focus. We're going to get back to the offense in a little bit. We're going to talk about Josh Allen. the lack of targets for Stephon Diggs. We're going to save that because we're talking about sort of the positives in this game. And I want to make sure that we talk about this defense that held Justin Fields to 11 yards rushing, 1.57 yards per carry, held the Bears to 13 points and 11 first downs. The Bears were 2 of 12 on third down, 1 of 4 on fourth down. They had 80 total rushing yards for the game, 129 passing yards for a total of 209. Oliver and Epinesa came in with a sack. Jaquan Johnson had sort of a meaningless interception late. Dane Jackson had a huge forced fumble, which Tim Settle recovered. Talk about this Buffalo Bills defensive effort versus the Chicago Bears.
I mean, containing Fields to the 11 yards on 7 carries is incredible. I mean, it's his lowest rushing total of the season. You have to go all the way back to week 2 when they played the Packers. He had 8 carries for 20 yards in that game. And you look at the rest of his games since week 2, his lowest total output rushing was 47 back in week 3. I mean, the guy's been averaging an incredible amount of rushing yards this season. He's obviously over 1,000 on the year as a quarterback, which is incredible. And we knew coming into this game that could be a problem for the Bills after they showed some leaky run D in the game against Miami. So for this defense to come in and stand up the way they did, Groot showing the hustle, this team really stringing Fields out and not letting him get to the edge. I thought Edmonds made a really couple of nice plays, stringing him out to the edge and kind of forcing him out of bounds as well. I was really impressed because that's the Bears' strength. Obviously, the Bills had, I'll say it for them, pretty much no respect for the Bears' passing game, which kind of allowed them to game plan this way, which I understand. But that's been the case for the Bears for most of the season against most of their opponents, and they've still been able to have success running the ball. So hats off to this Bills defense, and really all 3 levels played a part in this. It's not just the defensive line. And Roy asked, were you guys just slightly concerned when the Bears marched on the open? A little, but the Bills have been known to kind of like settle into games. Like, this defense has been so good, but if you go back and look, like some of their kind of like worst series have been like early in games before they settle in. And so for me, like, I was worried, like I was concerned, but I was not really like worried that the Bears were going to march up and down the field all day on them passing the ball.
And I'll tell you what, and I mentioned this in the Cover One group chat, like Luke Getsy is a really good play caller. I think he's got a bright future in this league. Chicago's offensive coordinator. And, you know, the first 15, 20 plays of every game are scripted. And when the Chicago Bears were on that opening drive game script, everything was clicking, despite the fact that their offensive line, which was already bad, was missing its 2 starting guards, and the fact that their receiving core probably rivals that of like an XFL or a CFL team with the injuries that they're dealing with. No offense to a guy we liked in the pre-draft process in Velus Jones Jr., like not a great receiving core, not a great offensive line, yet they were still able to march down the field under that game script of Luke Getsy. But then eventually, game script only means so much, because as much as we want to rip on maybe Ken Dorsey as games progress, a lot of times after that initial game script, yes, you can blame offensive coordinators for the flow of games, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But, you know, as you get more into the game and as the game wears on, it's more about the talent of the players than it is the play calls of the offensive coordinator. And you saw that in this football game, because there's only so much Luke Getsy could do with all the cards stacked against him. And the Buffalo Bills defense was just so vastly superior talent-wise to what the Chicago Bears had to play with on Sunday. But kudos to the Buffalo Bills for doing just that and showing up and having themselves a hell of a game. Pops Mafia comes in and says, biggest surprise player of the year for me is Shaq Lawson. And I would tend to agree with that. And one of the things that I would say to that too is that I would honestly, I know some people want to rip on Boogie Basham and some people want to rip on AJ Epinesa and all that stuff. But if I were the Buffalo Bills, I would make it a point of emphasis this offseason to retain Jordan Phillips, to retain Shaq Lawson, and then to go spend the rest of my money either trying to find Jordan Poyer's replacement if he walks, or adding to this offense, this offensive line, this receiving core. I would run this entire defensive line back again in 2023. Yep. I think one of my top priorities is retaining Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips so we can utilize our resources elsewhere next season. What are your thoughts on Lawson and Phillips, who came back this game, got a little bit hurt again. He was playing banged up, but he's been a pretty vital player for this team this year as well.
Yeah, he's clearly not 100%, but he's been vital and he's an emotional jolt to this defense too, right? Especially now with Von Miller not being there. Obviously, Von creates an immediate jolt when he makes a big play. When he's on the field, without him there, the Bills need guys like Jordan Phillips and they need guys like Jordan Poyer to be those emotional jolts for this team. So I agree with you. I think this Bills front off, like Brandon Beane has invested a lot of dollars in draft capital now into this defensive line. I don't see. It will be very hard for me to see a path where you do that again in 2023, either through the draft or through free agency. I think you run it back, and I do agree, Roy. Jordan Phillips needs to stay a little healthier, but that's probably why you're able to get a guy like that who's talented but has not. He has found his best home in Buffalo. But yes, he does. I do agree. He needs to stay on the field a bit more.
And that's what I'm getting at too. Like, I feel like both Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips, the seasons that they're having, they could probably go out into the free agent market and get a nice payday. Maybe not so much Jordan Phillips now with all these injuries, but I feel like they're both going to, number one, want to come back to Buffalo. And number two, I think they'll come back to Buffalo for less money than maybe some other people are willing to pay, because I think injuries bring down Jordan Phillips' value a little bit. So he'd rather just stay in Buffalo, a place where he's comfortable. And I think Shaq Lawson has flamed out at so many different stops now outside of Buffalo that I think he'll come back to Buffalo for a, sort of a deflated rate. I'm not saying he's going to take a massive discount like he is this year, playing for pennies, but I think the both guys could come back at an affordable rate, and we can focus our resources elsewhere. And yes, Tremaine Edmunds is going to be a top priority this offseason as well. It'll be interesting to see if the Buffalo Bills have to utilize that franchise tag or they can work out something long-term with him. Before we move on to some other things, my player of the game was my take me higher player of the game. And that's Matt Milano. He had 3 run stops in this game, 4 pressures, 3 hurries, and a quarterback hit. He gave Justin Fields something to think about all game. So for me, Matt Milano was my player of the game. Who would be your player of the game?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard not to give it to Devin Singletary with what he did, but I'm going to James Cook, right? Just for setting the tone with that touchdown to kind of get the Bills back on track. And he was my wild card player pick. So I do want to give it to James Cook. I think, let me just say this. I'll give it to the entire running game player of the game. James Cook, Devin Singletary, Josh Allen chipping in for another 41. The running game of the Bills with those 3 guys, and we'll just give the game balls to the running backs for this one. Those are my players of the game.
Yeah, we got Walter Scales coming in saying Epinesa has played well, and our guy Bruce Exclusive tweeted out after AJ Epinesa's sack, AJ Epinesa quietly having the quietest 7 sack season of all time. And I was like, wait, no, there's no way that's true. And I Googled it. ESPN says he's only got 6.5, but either way, 6.5, 7 sacks. That is a quiet 6.5, 7 sacks for AJ Epinesa on the season so far. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, Pat Moran took some heat for saying it was I think he originally said it was like it wasn't a quiet, but it was like some other word he used, and he kind of took some flack. But he's kind of right. Like, he didn't need to backtrack. I mean, this is fine, right? If you're AJ Epinesa, and I think the thing that people were like expecting is like, oh, 6.5 sacks. That's a surprise, because like you haven't really thought that he's made any in like huge moments in games, and I think that's probably why people kind of are maybe raise their eyebrow a bit at that. But he has been solid, and I think that for what he is now at this point in expectations, like he is now meeting my level of expectation of what I have from him, and like my expectations have lowered. So I'm not saying like this is what I hope for him from day one, but with my expectations recalibrated, I'm now okay with what he is, and he's average. Like he is, maybe he's above average slightly, but he's not going to be a superstar. He's not elite, but he is he's a contributor. The
thing is, I don't think either AJ Epinesa or Boogie Basham right now are second contract players, but they're certainly fine in the role that they're playing right now as like the wave defensive ends. They set the edge. They give you a little bit of a pass rush pop. Guys like Basham can kick inside to that 3 tech. Depending on what their market is when free agency hits or whether they take like a step in their development, like they're just not second contract players right now, but they certainly are filling a role. And you can argue all day whether the Bills should have wasted second round picks on guys who are wave defensive ends, but I think they've both been solid or average, however you want to put it. So if you take away the draft pick aspect of it and just look at the player, they've both been pretty solid football players for this team this season in the roles that they are in. All right. So before we get to that too, Kingsley Jonathan had a couple of nice plays back and forth. And then he had like a one nice play and then they threw a flag. And I knew the second they threw the flag, it was going to be offsides on Kingsley Jonathan. Cause I was like, no way Kingsley Jonathan got to the quarterback that quick to bat the ball down. And sure enough, it was an offsides on Kingsley Jonathan. Then you didn't hear much of him after that, but 19 snaps. He had a couple of pop plays. He had that one penalty. Kingsley Jonathan is the guy who has a legitimate chance to make this football team next season because, 6'5", 260 pounds. He seems like a relatively good athlete. He popped last preseason or this past preseason. He's a guy to keep an eye on and keep earmarked for the future because I think he's a guy who could join this defensive line rotation.
Yeah, obviously it was sad to see him get picked up, but glad the Bills were able to get him back. The Bills love keeping these types of guys around. We saw what they've done with Mike Love and others. And so the path to the active roster wasn't a straight line, but he maybe is putting enough on tape and contributing enough in limited action that he's going to give the Bills thought, for next year and into camp, and he's going to have a legitimate chance, probably depending on what happens with maybe, we don't expect Von Miller to be back at the beginning of the season. Maybe there's an extra roster spot available.
Von's thinking playoffs right now. Man's a freak.
Yeah. Okay. Like he's on
he's
IR,
not going
right?
to, but he's
back.
thinking it. Yeah.
What I'm saying, there could be a roster spot at the beginning of next year, like there was with Trey White being on the not inactive roster at the beginning of 2022. So who knows, right? The Bills like to keep a lot of guys on the defensive line. They did that this year and last year. So there is a chance for Kingsley.
All right. On to the drive of the day. And for me, the drive of the day or the drive of the game on Saturday was the first drive of the second half. Started with Allen to Diggs for 15 yards, which was sadly his first target of the game. We're going to get to that in a second. There were 2 dump offs to Devin Singletary on that drive for 19 yards. Those were both of his catches in that game, and they were big catches. 33-yard Singletary run capped off that drive for a touchdown, and then Josh Allen hit Khalil Shakir for the 2-point conversion. It put the Buffalo Bills up 14-10, and they didn't look back from there. That was my drive of the game, coming out after that disappointing end to the first half where they were down at halftime, coming right back, scoring, and making it a touchdown game by capping it off with that 2-point conversion. Was that your drive of the game, or did you have another drive that really sticks out to you in your mind?
No, I mean, that was the one for me. I mean, that was the one that you had to have. The Bills, as we know, have not they haven't won a lot of coin tosses this year, but this is one they got the ball to start, to start the third quarter there. And it did put that 8-play, 86-yard drive together in only 4 minutes, by the way. So just a little over 4 minutes. So to me, I have to agree. That was the drive of the game. I also would say there was a stretch there kind of after that where there were a couple punts, then the Bills fumbled, the Bears turned it over on downs. Josh Allen threw the pick. The Bears got the field goal to bring it within 8. And then a couple punts later, the Bills finally break into the end zone to make it 28-13 much later in the game. Maybe you could consider that, but I do think the drive coming out to start the second half would be my drive of the game as well.
All right. So now we're going to turn our attention to maybe not the negatives, but maybe some of the things that the Buffalo Bills can work to improve if we want to really get over the hump and win that Super Bowl this year. So some things that need to be worked on and some things that we noticed and reflected on from this game against the Chicago Bears.
Ron, are you okay? Ron. Ron, where are you? I'm in a glass case of emotion.
And he went to his father for comfort.
All right. So to me, the number one thing that I think the Buffalo Bills can work on, obviously Tyler Bass, who's been one of the best kickers in football this year. He missed an extra point. He missed a field goal in the first half. There was poor tackling on kicks and punts. Field position was an issue in the first half for the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen had 2 interceptions. There was the Gabriel Davis fumble as well. The Buffalo Bills only scored 6 first half points. To me, you cannot beat playoff caliber teams like the team we face next week in the Cincinnati Bengals if you can't control field position and if you give teams too many extra possessions. That was my biggest cause of concern after this game, was how long we let the Bears stay in it because of some of these dumb boneheaded plays that we were making.
And this is kind of the overarching theme for what the Bills have, where their criticisms have come, I think in large part this year, has been in self-inflicted wounds, right? Like, it hasn't been a lot of situations where the Bills have gotten outplayed or dominated because of better talent or better execution necessarily by the opposing team. Like, the Bills have largely let teams hang in games or have lost games because they themselves have inflicted wounds, self-inflicted wounds. And these turnovers had gone away, right, for a bit. And yes, there were a couple this game, and it's not going to be 100% clean every game, but you do need to have a little bit of a fast start against some better teams. Now this offense can come back from being down. That's fine. But I do think that it just wasn't crisp, right? It wasn't as crisp as we had seen in the last couple weeks, kind of leading up to this game. And so for me, that is something that kind of gives me a little bit of concern. And then I think for me too, sometimes I feel like we kind of like the play calling kind of gets stale again. Like, there are moments where it just like ebbs and flows up and down, and you feel like there are a lot of good like moments of play calling, and then it kind of like there are a lot of moments where you're like, what was that? So for me, I think consistency and sequencing in the play calling, we've used that word a lot in the past when describing Brian Daboll, is something that Ken Dorsey is going to have to learn and go through these growing pains. But he has shown that ability to evolve a bit in kind of getting Knox involved and that type of thing. So there's still room for improvement there, for sure. There's still room for improvement.
Yeah. And Bruce Mott comes in and says, but did you watch the Bengals play the Pats? They made mistakes too. That's not like that. That's the thing, is like this segment of the show is not about like bashing the Bills and saying the Bills aren't as good as the Bengals or the Chiefs, etc. It's simply like reflecting upon our mistakes that we made as a team and figuring out like what we can do to improve and what we didn't like, what we didn't like of what we saw. But it is nice to keep a perspective. Every team has warts. The Bengals almost blew it against Mac Jones led New England Patriots last week, right?
It's true.
The Houston Texans took the Kansas City Chiefs to overtime last week, right? Every team has warts. The LA Chargers are playing like dog shit against the Indianapolis Colts right now. I'm about to lose in the semifinals to Joe Marino. All I needed was 20 points from Justin Herbert and Jesse Palmer, and I don't even think I'm going to get 20 points from those two players to beat Joe Marino in the semifinals of our Keeper Dynasty League. So Bruce Nolan, if you're listening, I'm hoping for a big second half from Justin Herbert so I can be playing you in the championship game. But every team has their warts. Every team has their flaws. We're simply just trying to figure out like what the Buffalo Bills can do to get better and to fix it. And a couple of people pointed out now in the comment section, Gabriel Davis, like on paper, 3 for 45. He had a good day and a touchdown. He had the fumble. I'm not mad at him about the fumble. I think it was just a good peanut punch. He didn't toe tap very well on one play that I remember where he couldn't get both feet in when he probably should have. Most receivers make that play. He usually makes that play, and not going back in the end zone to draw that PI. That also sort of rubbed me the wrong way. It's becoming more and more evident that Gabriel Davis is a good NFL wide receiver who has a place in this offense, but he is not an alpha wide receiver capable of taking the pressure off of Stephon Diggs in isolation. The Buffalo Bills are going to need to spend some resources this offseason adding to the adding to the depth chart at wide receiver, because it's going to take more than just Gabriel Davis to take that pressure off of Stephon Diggs.
It's going to take more than Gabriel Davis, and you still don't know exactly what you're going to have in Khalil Shakir. I mean, he was a early fifth rounder. We thought he would go higher, but like you still don't know, right? Still don't know. You guys are really reaching. We're going to criticize Jay or Bass and the weather. I'm happy. I mean, look, I'm not going to criticize Bass too much. Like, I don't think we're saying that. Like, he's been one of the best kickers all year. But I will say on the special teams front, the coverage units were not great. So I mean, it's tough, right? I get it. It's tough to hold the ball. It's tough maybe to cover it a bit when it's windy like that. Like we're just pointing some things out here. I'm not going to criticize.
And that's the thing. Like you can be critical of your football team. Like Josh Allen was 15 of 26 in this game for 172 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. That's a bad football game. That's a bad stat line. The caveat being most QBs couldn't even operate in the conditions that Josh Allen operated in this football game. So the positives are Josh Allen is a weatherproof quarterback. Josh Allen can play in any conditions. Josh Allen was still able to put up 2 touchdowns plus rush for a touchdown in these conditions. But because he's such a weatherproof quarterback, he took his abilities too far in this football game, and he threw into. There was 2 throws into double coverage on Isaiah McKenzie. The interception, which he didn't see Kyler Gordon dropping back, whatever. He still threw a ball into double on Isaiah McKenzie. And then there was another one on like 3rd down where he threw into double. Stop throwing to Isaiah McKenzie in double coverage. Like that's just not smart ball. So whether it wasn't schemed right or whatever it is, stop throwing to a 5'8" dude in double coverage. He did it twice in this game. He overthrew James Cook. That's a mental error. That's a mental flaw. There was a couple of different situations where he could have dumped the ball down, but he held onto the ball and looked for something downfield. In a game like this, tuck and run when you have the tuck and run. Take the dump off when you have the dump off. Josh Allen's abilities to throw in this weather are phenomenal and awesome, but they do come back to bite him when he tries to do things that maybe he shouldn't. What were your thoughts on Josh Allen's game as a whole? Because I thought it was an average game, but I thought he made some bad mistakes.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say this. I think there is some truth to the thought around knowing that you can make mistakes and taking some shots against an inferior opponent because you know you're going to get other chances and you know you're probably going to end up winning the game anyway. So it seems like, at least in my mind, like a couple of those throws were still bad, right? I'm not going to say like the one to Cook wasn't really taking a shot, right? That was just a bad throw. But like some of these taking shots and like maybe hoping for a PI call or something like that, like I kind of get it against bad teams because you never really feel like you're going to lose the game if you make a mistake. But it's just kind of a weird, contrarian, like almost, I don't know. It's like a not really intuitive way to think about it, but it's like counterintuitive in a way. But part of me feels like sometimes we saw that against the Packers in the second half, right? A game where you really felt like the Bills were not going to lose, but like trying to just put the dagger in the heart of the opponent. And sometimes like putting the dagger in the heart of the opponent is marching down for a 10-15 play drive and just taking the will out of them, right, by doing that. And it doesn't have to come in one play. So at the end of the day, if this is the worst we're saying about this quarterback and this offense, then this team is in really, really good shape.
Yeah. And again, it's not all on Josh Allen. Like Bill's Fever comes in and he makes a great point here. Says Josh has the worst weapons of any Super Bowl contender, being the main mistake not adding to the wide receiver room in the offseason when where all the competition was. I would say the Chiefs are about equal to us in terms of weapons. Like I don't think the Chiefs weapons blow our weapons away. If you take Diggs and you take Kelsey and you cancel each other out, you take those 2 out of the equation. I don't think the Chiefs are like that much better than us in terms of what they have in terms of auxiliary weapons, but the Eagles certainly, I think, have better weapons. I'm blanking on the Bengals, obviously, clearly with Boyd and Higgins and Chase and Mixon have some better weapons. You could probably argue the Cowboys have better weapons, but there's a reason why they were in on OBJ as well. Like they got CD, Michael Gallup starting to get healthy. They have Dalton Schultz, and then they have the 2 running backs. But Yeah, it's I would definitely say that the Buffalo Bills probably are on the lower end of the contenders in terms of the weapons that they have. But I will say this about Josh Allen, just to close it off on Josh Allen. Every year, Josh Allen sort of takes a flaw or an error in his game, right? And he makes it a point of emphasis for his offseason. He comes back the next season, and that is a better part of his game, whether it's the downfield stuff or it's the accuracy or it's the yards after the catch. I would like to see Josh Allen this offseason make his point of emphasis to just go back and watch every vintage Tom Brady game. Like, just go back and watch Tom Brady tape. And I want Josh Allen to work on not being afraid to beat teams by doing the death by 1,000 paper cuts, by taking the death by 1,000 paper cuts route. Because I feel like every single game where he has multiple interceptions, it stems from the fact that he's just not taking the dump offs and he's not taking the underneath stuff. Brian Dable did a great job of, I think, harnessing Josh Allen and taking away like the worst elements and the worst thoughts in Josh Allen's mind and helping him with play calling. Ken Dorsey, I think, maybe feeds into some of the worst elements of Josh Allen's game by just letting him drop back and make plays off script. I'm not saying it's all Dorsey's fault because I think Josh is missing a lot of this cutdowns and stuff, but you saw it early in the season against the LA Rams. Josh Allen was super patient and he was dinking, he was dunking. He was like 18 of 21 or something, but like for 150 yards. And he dinked and dunked so much that it opened up in the second half. He hit Diggs, he hit Davis, like he hit these big shots down the field. It seems like since that first game and as the season's progressed, especially thinking back to that Steelers game, and I think the cockiness that might have come from that Steelers game, he just seems like he's not taking some of those dump offs and he's just trying to force the ball down the field too much. Now, I don't want Josh to not be Josh because I watch some teams play and they dump the ball off too much and they don't take shots down the field too much. But I think Josh needs to find a balance this offseason and he needs to be more willing to be more patient because defensive coordinators will play this game with him all day and they'll drop back these two deep shells and they'll try to pressure with four. And if he's not willing to dump the ball off, dump the ball off, he's going to give teams extra possessions if he tries to force the ball down the field. So I'm not saying Josh Allen is bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that should be a point of emphasis this offseason is learning to be more patient, learning to add that death by 1,000 paper cuts element that Tom Brady has utilized to perfection over the years, add that to his game and combine that with what already makes him so good down the field.
And I think he has it, right? Because we've seen it. We've seen him do
100%.
it. I think it's just like when the situation calls for it, he's not doing it 100% of the time, which is it's a tall order. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying like that it's going to happen every time, but it's if you're looking for any area of improvement that Josh Allen can make to his game, because there are very, very few, by the way, like he's elite 99 rating and essentially everything. Like that one area where it's like take what the defense gives you, especially against maybe some inferior opponents where you can like literally take the will and the wind out of their sails to beat them. Like if that's one area that's a point of emphasis and that can be something that he can even incrementally get better on. And let's say like he does that already now, like 75% of the time. But if he does that now going forward, like 95% of the time, that could be the difference between winning a playoff game, right? I mean, I'm just saying, like, it could be. And so it's a very, very pedantic thing if we think about the big picture of the landscape of the NFL quarterbacks, because Josh is in a tier of his own.
Yeah.
But that's the one thing you could say that maybe like, okay, let's like add that to the arsenal. And then all of a sudden, like this guy is literally, there's nothing for him to improve on.
Yeah, I mean, there's always things for him to improve on. There's always things for him to get better on, and that's why we're sitting here and we're critiquing like what went wrong in this game, what can be cleaned up, what we can improve, because we have a much better opponent coming in next week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Speaking of things that can improve, Diggs wasn't targeted at all in the first half. His first target came on the first play of the second half. Throughout the entire game, he had 2 targets, he had 2 catches, 26 yards. That's it. I understand the weather being what the weather was, but to me, you really can't have games where Stephon Diggs is only targeted 2 times. What were your thoughts on the lack of targeting Stephon Diggs in this football game?
I mean, part of me wants to think that maybe it wasn't needed. I don't like you saw the game last night. I know they had Trace McSorley, DeAndre Hopkins, like one catch for 4 yards, was still targeted like 10 plus times. But yeah, I'm sure that this is going to be made out to be a bigger deal than it probably really is. Like, we have grown so accustomed to stuff on 12 target a game guy, the guy that's going to get 8 to 10 catches every game. He's had, 100 plus now in 3 straight years with the Bills. And he's been really, really efficient with his targets and just a volume monster when it comes to reception. So when we see a down game like this, I do think there tends to be a little bit of an overreaction. So I'm going to, like, Eric probably will tell me better than anyone once he goes back and watches the film on Diggs. Like, was this more of like he just wasn't needed, or was it Josh just didn't look his way? Like, we'll find out. But I'm not going to read too much into it yet, because in the biggest games when we've needed Stephon Diggs, he has been there.
Yeah, we got a couple of people talking about, can't even imagine if Allen had a good offensive line. For the people who are like, well, you shouldn't criticize Josh Allen. His wide receivers dropped this many passes. His offensive lineman is this bad. We're willing to stipulate to all of those things. The offensive line can be better. The receivers can catch the ball better. He needs more weapons. There's nothing you can do about that until 2023, until this offseason. Nothing we can do about that till March. That's on Brandon Beane to reflect and to improve this roster. But Josh Allen is probably sitting somewhere right now watching game tape against the Chicago Bears, figuring out what he did wrong and how he can fix it. Josh Allen is probably harder on himself than Josh Allen isn't sitting there saying, well, my wide receiver too has a 55% catch rate. It's not my fault. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. He's not saying, well, my offensive line can't do this. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Josh Allen is actively watching film and trying to improve his game. So if he's out there criticizing himself and being critical of himself, people can be critical of him too and understand that he needs to be better too. Are the Buffalo Bills asking him to do superhuman things? 100% we are. We're asking this man to literally be Superman. There are people who are drawing up comic strips and putting it over Clark Kent Lane in Buffalo of him as Superman. The dude's been an absolute Superman. He can't do that every year. Brandon Beane's got to do a better job in the future of allocating better resources on offense. I think you'll see all that focus we put on defense the last couple of years. I think that focus will be on offense this offseason. But until we get there, I think the Buffalo Bills need Josh Allen to be pretty much perfect starting this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. They need him to be practically perfect, in my opinion, if they're going to be Super Bowl champions. What are your thoughts?
This Bengals team is really good, and I know Bills fans, we have felt like for years that we haven't gotten enough respect as a team, especially now in the more recent Josh Allen era when he's been good. Even I think, obviously now I think it's different. There's a lot more respect now. But I do think the Bengals are a team maybe that doesn't get, I mean, Joe Burrow gets a lot of respect, but I don't know that a lot of people are still really taking them too seriously. Like, a lot of people still think they fluked their way into that Super Bowl last year and don't believe that the Bengals are a great team. I've been on record and saying that they're frauds this year. Like, I said that earlier in the year, and I look stupid now because they are a really good team. They're a very complete team. They have excellent weapons, and they've been in and out of the lineup too. Like, Chase missed time, obviously, this year. Joe Mixon has been banged up at points this year. T. Higgins has been banged up at points this year. They are a really deep offense. That offensive line has taken a couple hits recently, but they also have a decent enough defense that could take them further this year. And again, they could make a Super Bowl run. I think the Bengals team roster this year is better than the team they had last year. And so this is basically your chance to cement the number 1 seed, I feel like, if you're the Bills heading into this Monday night game. And how about the luck for the Monday night crew to finally get a good Monday night game? I mean, like, they've had so many bad games. Now they're getting an absolute gem. Gem.
Joe Buck said right before this Chargers Colts game today, he was like, 8 of the 14 teams have 8 of the 14 playoff teams are set, which means that 6 more teams still yet to go with 2 weeks. The NFL must love that. There are so many bad football teams that are like in contention right now, or teams that are like sub 500 right now that are still on that graphic of could make the playoffs. Something needs to be cleaned up. Like they need to add like an 18th game to like even things out or something like that, because there are just so many teams with like losing records right now that are like in the hunt or going to make the playoffs, and just makes me want to puke. There's just so many bad teams, but in order to beat the good teams that are left in the playoffs, the Buffalo Bills are going to have to step up their game. And Jason M says, we don't respect the Bengals. Really, they have more weapons than we do. If you look at it, to me, that's going to be a 50-50 game. Like, I really do think next Monday night is flip a coin. Like the Bills and the Bengals are a draw at this point. If the Bills were fully healthy, I think I would give advantage Bills. Like if Micah Hyde and Von Miller were both healthy, and the Bills defense could be as elite as they are capable of being, but they're missing a ton of key pieces, the Bills. But the Bengals are also missing a ton of key pieces. They're probably going to be without Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. We'll see the injury report this week. And they're now out without Lyle Collins, who to me wasn't having the greatest season of his life at right tackle. He was still getting beat by some of these speed rushers, but he was certainly an improvement of what they had last year. So the Bengals are facing some injuries as well. So that's going to be a really interesting game that we will dive into during our pre-game show on Monday night of next week. But until then, before we head out of here, we have our Jabronis of the week.
Jabroni, you are 3 seconds away. And The Rock means 3 seconds away from The Rock to lay the smack down on your candy ass.
Bro, I gotta stop you though. You keep using this word jabroni, and it's awesome.
We got T Dobbs coming and says, I'm signing out. And for me, honestly, at this point, bye. Have a good day. Like, have a good night. Like, it's too depressing for me this time of season. How can you be down on a 12-3 football team? If you can't handle a little constructive criticism of your football team, don't watch. Like, I'm about to make T Dobbs my jabroni. Like, if you can't handle 40 minutes of blowing smoke up their ass and 20 minutes of constructive criticism, I don't know what to tell you. I don't. But do you have any jabronis of the week?
Yeah, I was kind of like joking around, putting this like sheet of paper in front of my mouth. It's like Russell Wilson with the football. Like, I mean, the Denver Broncos organization, all the way from maybe ownership to the altercation they had on the sideline to Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett getting fired. I was wrong on this team. I thought they'd be a playoff team this year. Nathaniel Hackett getting fired today was probably like about time. Your boy Lettuce, who's a follower of ours, did make a good point on Twitter. He's like, well, maybe like they're trying to set a precedent to not fire a guy and like try to show other coaches out there that were willing to be patient, but you couldn't after that. You just lost to the Rams, who dropped a 50 burger on you. A Rams team who has been pitiful on offense, by the way, for most of the year without Matthew Stafford there. And you just got 50 dropped on you. And Russell Wilson looks like he is going to be an absolute detriment to that franchise, at least for the next couple of years, unless something really extreme happens. Because Nathaniel Hackett getting fired is one thing, but Russell Wilson just does not look like the same guy that he was in Seattle. And look, I would say that was probably a really hard thing for Seattle to do, to trade Russell Wilson, the guy that won them the Super Bowl. But maybe John Schneider and that team in Seattle knew what they were doing, because this guy looks absolutely cooked to me. So Jabroni of the week, the entire Denver Broncos organization, all the way down to the quarterback, Russell Wilson.
I mean, that was really bad too. Like Dalton Reisner, who was their like man of the year, their Walton Payton man of the year, shoving Brett Rippon because Brett Rippon chewed him out for not helping like Russell Wilson up after Russell Wilson got sacked or hit late. Like Deion Dawkins or Spencer Brown would have been like, it wasn't an egregious play by the Rams defenders either, but Deion Dawkins or Spencer Brown would have been letting them know what was up. And you can tell that very few people in that Denver Broncos organization, from players to coaches to ownership, like have respect for Russell Wilson, and they understand the huge ridiculous mistake that they made. Greg Tomsett was talking about it in the Cover One group chat. It's one thing to be fake and like, but still like work your butt off or whatever. But it's another thing to be like fake and then like in your face about it and full of yourself about it. And Russell Wilson has to be one of the fakest dudes on the planet. And then on top of that, have such just a thinks he's so much better than everyone else. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't feel bad for Nate Hackett because like he wasn't qualified to be a head coach in the National Football League, and he somehow like conned his way in there because they thought that hiring Nathaniel Hackett would get them Aaron Rodgers, and it didn't. And then it looked like Nathaniel Hackett was going to somehow look good because they stumbled into Russell Wilson, but then it fell apart with Russell Wilson. But I'm not going to touch the Miami thing because honestly, they say that all the NFL spotters missed it. Tua got right up after he hit his head, and he seemed fine other than the 3 interceptions he threw in the second half. He seemed fine post-game. I'm not mad at like the spotters or anything. I do think that Tua needs to ask himself if he wants to play again this year because of his head injuries. It's his 3rd concussion on the season, but that's on him. That's a decision he and medical professionals, et cetera, have to make. So I'm not going to touch on that for my jabroni, but I will say this, my jabroni of the week. And this is another statistic that I got from Hans on Twitter today. The Bills are 4-0 in December. The rest of the AFC East is 1-11. All of those Jets fans crowning themselves late November. All of those Dolphins fans crowning themselves in late November. All of those Patriots fans who thought, well, you know, maybe we still got a shot. You don't. The Buffalo Bills showed in the month of December who is the king of the AFC East for the 3rd year in a row. And the Dolphins and the Jets, while they were celebrating their October banners, forgot that they play football in December and January, not that they've seen January football in some time in New York and Miami. So my jabroni of the week is the rest of the AFC East for going 1-11. How's that for uplifting to close out our show here?
Couldn't have said it better. Excellent. Russell Wilson leading the way and then closing it out with the AFC East. Jabronis of the week. It's nice. It is really, it's a nice feeling to be champs again 3 years in a row.
All right. So before we head out here, don't forget, if you're looking to support Cover One, the number one way you can do it is a Cover One Pass Club Access Premium membership. You get exclusive members-only content, in-depth analysis, including scheme, play, and player breakdowns, scouting reports, and analytics analysis, access on unlimited devices, access to the Cover One community on our Slack channel. We always have great conversations there, and you can see the lower left-hand corner. Always, you know, Eric and Anthony and all of them are doing film breakdowns over Zoom and over private YouTube channels, helping people better understand the game and breaking down film with the fans, just to give you guys that sort of extra detail and that extra sort of focus that you don't necessarily get outside of the Cover One community. And you also get that sexy official shirt and decal if you become a Cover One insider, One Pass insider. Again, if you just want to support this show, smashing that like and share, always appreciated. If you're watching on demand, leave a comment and we'll get back to you in the comment section over the course of the week. You can always listen on demand on any major podcasting platform by searching Air Raid Buffalo. And you can catch us again live Monday before the Bills take on the Cincinnati Bengals in what is one of the biggest late season games that I can remember on the NFL docket, league-wide, not just Bills specific, but league-wide. But before we get out here, Dave, any final thoughts?
Look, for those who watch our show a lot, we did spend a lot of time early in the show talking about a lot of positives for this team, but we always try to be as objective as possible. At the end of the day, we're all fans. We all want this team to win, but we can say things about the team that we feel like should be improved or whatever. Like, the standards are different. I think that Bills Fever put it great in the show, in the comments. Like, this is a Super Bowl caliber team, and we're critiquing. The critiques we're making are because we want this team to be Super Bowl caliber and Super Bowl winners, right? And so everything we're saying on that front is because we want this team to win the Super Bowl, and that's at the end of the day what we all want in this, in this family of Bills Mafia. So for that, it's on to Cincinnati, as Bill Belichick famously said, and it's going to be a great one next Monday.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Are we having fun yet?